Hey friends, this is Monica with Pastor James doing Sunday Unpacked, and today we are going to do a special episode, and it is actually going to be video. So if you're getting just sound, you might be missing out because I think Pastor James has some pictures to share with us.
I do, yeah.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about Zimbabwe and Pastor James' trip there. So next week, we're going to kind of go back to our original Sunday Unpacked where we talk about the sermons, and we already have one question. So just remember, send in your questions to text us to 217-712-6621 or by email to questions@taylorvillechristian.com. So now, Pastor James, are you ready to
Yes.
talk about Zimbabwe?
I'm ready.
All right. So first question, how many times have you been?
So this is the second time we've been. Well, Leanne and I went together the first time. So I say we. I went by myself this time. So the first time was in 2013. So it's been 11 years ago. So it's been a good little while. I mean, I was hoping that I might get back before then. But last time we went to the college, which is where I stayed this time, but it was for a pastor's conference. So this was a little bit different trip than I made in the past.
So how did you connect with your friends from Zimbabwe?
About roughly 15 years ago, the church we were in Florida supported what was then Zimbabwe Christian College, is now Central Africa Christian College. And so we had two representatives come from the college, and they stayed with us for, I don't know, it was a couple weeks, maybe even 3 weeks. And so I just connected with them because they were in the office every day. And so the friend that I'm probably closest to, I think we have some photos here. This is my friend, Sydney Mavodza. He's a pastor in Zimbabwe, but he's also principal of the college. And we might call him the president of the college. They just use more of a British terminology than we do. And this is Sydney with two of his daughters. He actually has three daughters. This is the oldest and the youngest. So that's Dina on the right and Ropa in the middle, and then Sydney there. And that was actually after church one Sunday while we were there outside of the church where he preaches. So we've known each other. He's been in our home. I've been in his home. And he actually preached at TCC one time several years ago as well. So some of you would maybe recognize him from that. But we've just had a great friendship. We're almost exactly the same age, even though our lives were very different in a lot of ways. We hold a lot of good things in common too. So it's been a great friendship for me, and I hope it has for him too. But he's just been a real blessing in my life. So spending the time with him was part of the blessing of going. But the work that we did together, I think, was really important too. So that's how we got to know each other. And I'm just thankful for that friendship. If you had told me 20 years ago, you're going to have this great friendship with this pastor in Africa, I would have said, well, that's awesome, but I really don't know how that could possibly happen. But it did, and I'm thankful for it.
Or how it could work. I mean,
right, exactly.
We complain about the negatives of electronic or how we're going to screen time, but it's been such a blessing for so many people to be able to touch base with people on the other side of the world. And I think sometimes we get so caught up in the negative aspects of it that we forget what a wonderful ministry tool it is.
Correct. Yep. And it has been for us just in friendship, so.
So what are the biggest cultural differences?
Well, there's a lot. And you and I sort of broke it down in several ways. And one of the ones that you asked about was family. And, in some ways, family's family wherever you go, right? Families are important, and they're sort of the basis for life. And as you can see, Sydney has three daughters. We have two daughters. That's sort of the core of our life. He and his wife have been married for many years, and she's a great Christian leader in Zimbabwe as well. But there's some big differences. So for Sydney, his dad had three wives. So he'll talk about, I saw one of my mothers, which is not language that I would use, right?
Yeah, right.
So for Christians, and this was a big issue when missionaries went to Africa and other places, or Zimbabwe and other places in Africa, was how do you deal with that, right? So you've got these families where there's more than one wife, and now they become Christians. What do you do with that? So that was an important issue. But for Christians now, they don't marry more than one wife, but polygamy is still legal in Zimbabwe. So the way Sydney described it to me in this trip, as a matter of fact, was that when you get married, you can choose one of two different marriages, right? So you can go in, as he and his wife did, and said, we're going to be married only to each other for the rest of our lives. Or you can choose, okay, yes, we're getting married, but there may be other wives later on. So that changes the whole dynamic of marriage and creates a complex web of relationships when you've got multiple wives, multiple kids from each marriage, all that going on. It's very different. So there's that piece, but then extended family is probably significantly more important than in the US. So, those family relationships run deep and run strong. And without getting into too much detail, I mean, there are responsibilities that you have. Life is a little more tenuous in Africa, right? So life expectancy isn't as long. So you have responsibilities as a family elder. If, parents pass away, or if one parent passes away, you take on the role of father or mother to these children, or even if they're grown, you have certain responsibilities. So it is more complex and far reaching maybe than it is in the US at this point, maybe more like it would have been 100 years ago. I don't even know,
Yeah.
but it is a little bit different. So family life is definitely sort of has some intricacies and complexities that we don't deal with now, so that's
Yeah.
that's a big difference.
I would that makes sense if polygamy is still part of
Right.
their culture, that extended family would be, they would take
Yes.
care of each other
Right.
more. So,
Right.
um, so housing, food, clothing, that kind of thing, bathrooms.
Yeah, so it varies dramatically. Just like in the US, we have people with very small apartments versus people with mansions, right? So I did see some really large houses, but they are few and far between. There are homes, like one of the homes we stayed in would be relatively similar to a home in the United States, though no one has air conditioning. So that's totally, that's just expected. You don't deal with that. But some really nice homes. Crime is a big problem because poverty is a big problem. And
Yeah.
so many houses have a wall around them with a gate. That's very common virtually anywhere, city, country, whatever. But then housing can look really different. So like this is typical out in the rural areas where you might have the little round, it's made of block, but then it has the straw roof.
Mm-hmm.
And there may be a complex of those depending on how many family lives there, but they're not very big. And in many places, there would not be indoor plumbing. There may not be electricity, probably won't be electricity. So that's very different. I may have another picture here. So you can see sort of in the background of this picture a lot of sort of small square houses
Mm-hmm.
that might be maybe 200 square feet, where you have the whole family living in one room. You would see in the front of this picture, you see that there's bricks there, and bricks are for sale everywhere. So almost every house is made of brick. There's virtually no wood structures, so people are all the time buying bricks, having bricks delivered, and then they're building themselves, their family, a small house. So in the city, this is near Harare, which is the capital city where I stayed, you would see places just like this view all the time of these small little houses, and they are really basic. So you got to carry your water in. You don't have electricity. There's going to be limited facilities for other things. So, it's difficult. Now, again, let's see. This is the house that I stayed in on campus
Okay.
at the college. It's actually like a duplex, so I was on the right-hand side, and it's really nice. I mean, it's all concrete floors, except the bathroom had some tile, but there's not carpeted or anything like that. But it had everything. It had a nice little kitchen with a range and a small refrigerator, and I had plumbing. And something that's different was like on the roof of that house, you see a big tank. Well, that's a solar water heater, which is awesome because when we were there before, we didn't have a lot of water, and you can see the big tank out beside the house
Yeah.
on the stilts. So I had plenty of water, plenty of hot water, which is a great thing.
Yeah.
And then solar panels on the roof. So I had electricity. So, I mean, I had everything I needed, but that would be really nice for
Yeah.
most people in
Yeah.
Africa. So it was a great setup
That's a
for,
luxury.
yeah,
Yeah.
right. Yeah. Um, a lot of the people who have professional jobs would have something like that, but the majority of people probably not. So
Mhm.
what
So
else? Go ahead.
food, um,
Lots of rice. Virtually every culture has a readily available source of starchy food, right? So in
mhm,
Europe, you might have a lot of bread, wheat's
mhm.
available.
Yeah.
In Ireland, you have potatoes. In lots of places around the world, you have rice. In lots of places, you have corn. And in Zimbabwe, you have a little bit of the both of the last two. So at the college, every day, you're feeding a lot of students. You don't have a lot of money. They'd get a mound of rice. I mean, like a lot of rice. And then a little piece of chicken or a little piece of beef. They also have what they call sadza, so it's like you make cornmeal and you make it with
Mhm.
water and you make it really, really thick. So like you can pick it up. So like you could dip it in gravy or whatever else. Um, but the flavor comes from the little bit of meat or whatever. So, that's the basic diet that a lot of people across the country would eat. There's a saying that sadza is life, and
Mm.
that's, it keeps you alive. It literally keeps
Yeah.
many people alive. Now, there were restaurants that we went to occasionally that had very much, like I had lasagna one night that was really good. I had a chicken dish that was really good. And a lot of tourists, foreigners, and some local people eat there as well. But the common people are not going to eat at most of those restaurants because they're just out of reach financially. They have Kentucky Fried Chicken now, which was not there when I went there last time, and that's become pretty popular. And then they have a lot of other chicken restaurants. Chicken Inn is everywhere, but it's just like it's just fried chicken and chips. We'd say fried chicken and French fries. So
Okay.
that's very common. Now, the one thing that was a little different was my last Sunday. We were out in a rural church, and um, I was the guest of honor for lunch at one of the elders' homes, and he served us sadza, or his wife did, sadza with goat intestines. That was not something I was expecting to eat or something I really wanted to eat. But since it was served and I was the guest, I ate it, and it was, for me, not delicious, and the texture was a little off-putting, but I survived it. And the way it was described to me is, if you were in that setting and you were going to go meet your future mother-in-law for the first time, this is the meal that she would serve. So it was a special meal that they made for me, and I appreciated their kindness. But that one's not for me every
Right.
day.
Well, and that's something I think people don't understand is when you go to a foreign country, especially a third world country, and they have taken the time to prepare a special meal for you, you're going to eat it.
That's right.
To not eat it would be such an insult to
Right.
them.
And they
So,
were very gracious
yeah,
hosts that day. I mean, over and above. And they were so kind. So yeah, you just
yeah,
go with it,
you
you
do.
know?
You got to take a lot of flexibility with
Right,
you when you
exactly
go.
right. That's right.
um, so clothing, do they wear Western
They
clothing? Do
do.
they wear like, okay.
They do. Yeah, Western clothing is pretty much the norm.
Uh-huh.
So, um, t-shirts, collared shirts, very common. For school, like at the college, they dress up a little more than college students would here.
Hmm.
So it would be common, especially if they have any role in like chapel or something like that,
Okay.
they would wear a coat and tie. And then they like to dress up. Professors a lot of times will wear a tie and or a coat if they're going to teach. So that it's very much what we wear, but maybe up just a little bit notch from informality. In
Hmm.
the schools, you can see that picture. That was
Mm.
at one of the schools we visited. Schools, everyone has uniforms.
Okay.
That's almost universal, and they look very much like that, except the color will vary. So each school will
Okay.
have its particular color. But that's very, very normal is to have uniforms just like that. So also that one is maybe a little more surprising to us is you see, this was the first Sunday I was there. It was a graduation service and a church service. So you see the people on the right wearing the graduation gowns, but on the left, and this was the way it was everywhere, ladies on one side, men on the other. So you see all the ladies or many of the ladies on the left side dressed alike. So in church on special Sundays, the ladies will wear their church uniform. So all those ladies, and they are regulated, and who gets to wear a uniform and who doesn't is very important. Okay. And so this is a way of showing unity. So the colors for our churches, Christian churches and churches of Christ in Zimbabwe, are red and white. So wherever you go, the ladies would be wearing those colors and basically that same uniform. Young ladies, older women, there is some variation, but you always see red and white. And in the front of most of the churches, they have some kind of fabric just to make it look nice, and it's almost always red and white as well. So that's something that's, I think, pretty different for us, that we wouldn't expect. But yeah,
Yeah.
church uniforms, that's a big deal.
Hmm. All right. How about the bathrooms?
So where I stayed is a bathroom just like we'd have in any of our
Hmm.
houses. Like out at the rural church, it was a farm bathroom.
Okay.
It was an outhouse basically.
Okay.
So that's pretty common in the rural areas because there's no plumbing.
Mm.
Um, in other places, they're more rustic than a lot of our restrooms are, but where there's plumbing, it's pretty much like ours.
Okay. That's good.
Yeah.
Um, so the jobs, like what do they do for a living, or how do they support their economy? What's their economics like?
It's rough, and it goes back to the fact that Zimbabwe was Southern Rhodesia under the British control,
Hmm.
and you had big farms. But then in about the year 2000, the government, which was independent from Britain by then, basically all the white farmers were forced off their land and the land was redistributed. Well, there's some justification for that because all those white farmers had taken land from people
Right.
originally, but it left a country with huge farms without the machinery or the know-how to use those farms. So Zimbabwe used to be sort of a breadbasket country for Southern Africa. Now they have to import lots of food, which costs more money. So those good farming jobs are not there like they used to be. So people work in all kinds of places, whether it's like, gas stations, fast food, there's grocery stores, but there's also people in big markets just selling whatever they have. I mean, all along the side of the roads, there were constantly people selling tomatoes and watermelon. And so it was just lined the roads. There was one section of road where everybody was selling honey because apparently that's an area where they
Yeah.
keep bees. Um, I looked up average income. So average wage, this is probably inflated because some people get a lot more, but something like between $500 and $600 a month.
Mm.
So, and then a lot of people just unemployed. So
Mm.
there's a tremendous amount of poverty, and it is overwhelming, really, to see. And if you looked at some of my Facebook posts, I didn't post a lot of that because I figure if someone came and visited, where we live, we wouldn't really be thrilled if they took pictures of the worst places and
Mm-hmm.
posted
Yeah.
them. So I didn't feel
Yeah.
like that was like the right thing to do. But the poverty is overwhelming in a lot of ways. So there are people who are barely surviving, and it's hard to see.
Yeah.
But there's also opportunity for people to go to school, to go to university, to be a lawyer, a doctor, a nurse. I mean, those opportunities are out there for people who can afford to get there. So, it's not that everybody is destitute, but there's just so many people who are. It's hard to see.
Yeah. So speaking of education, do they have like scholarship systems or anything
So
to help
they have public
change?
schools,
Yeah.
and it's a little different system. First of all, they follow the British system. So there's basically primary schools and then secondary schools or high schools. And for them, high school looks more like a combined junior high and high school. So when you get to high school, you start in Form 1, which would be like seventh grade, and then it
Mm-hmm.
goes up from there to Form 6 or 7. Um, and without getting into all the intricacies, it is really a British system. But so the schools, this was one school that we visited. A lot of schools are public schools. They do charge tuition, but there are many public schools that are run by mission organizations. So the college that I visited is part of a larger organization called Hippo Valley Christian Mission, that has schools that, I mean, there's 20,000 kids in their schools. So it's a big, big
Yeah.
mission. So they charge some tuition that people really work to be able to afford. And then the mission can choose the headmaster and the assistant headmaster, and then the government sends the rest of the teachers and assigns them to all these schools.
Hmm.
They can be moved around and adjusted, but some of the schools are really nice. Some of them are struggling a little bit. I mean, this one that's it's called Mashvingo Christian College. It's actually not a college, it's a high school, but that's the name of it. So this was a nice school that had a lot of great programming. The headmaster is in the picture in the middle there. His name is Edson. He was actually one of my students in my class, although he has way more degrees than I do. He wanted some ministry training. So my first time I taught online, he was one of my students. And this guy amazed me to meet him in person. I mean, his thing is, yes, there are students who are behind, but we are going to find some way to bring them up, and we're going to find some way to teach them a skill, right? So he has all kinds of programming. He has a piggery, which is not a phrase that I'd ever heard before, but they keep pigs. So, and I
Mm-hmm.
think maybe I have a picture. See there, I was wearing my pig socks
Yes.
and I got to go to the piggery. So,
That's awesome. I
and
love it.
so they have the students involved in that. They have chickens, they have goats. That's the last picture, but they had fish. I mean, when he got to that school, they didn't have a science lab, so he got them involved in that. And since then, they've brought engineers, they've had nurses come
Wow.
through, they've had a doctor come through. So, I mean, this guy is passionate about what he does and really wants to bring students to a point that they can support themselves. And it's one of those. This is one of those places where things are so different for us. We were in this school and they wanted me to speak. And, my natural audience is African high school students, right? I mean, I'm a perfect fit for that, of course. Um, but they did want me to speak. And so I was honored to do so. And in Sydney, my friend, who's the principal of the college, also spoke about, if they wanted to be in ministry, that they could come to the college. And he challenged them. And, he talked about what a good school they were in. And he said, we can, and he knew how to fire them up. I mean, he got going with them. We want to see doctors. We want to see engineers. We want to see nurses. We want to see teachers. We want to see pastors. We don't want to see prostitutes. We don't want to see drug addicts. We don't want to see drug dealers. And The point is, so many of those kids were right on the edge, and education could take them in one direction, and a lack of it could take them in a totally different and very destructive direction. And it just, I mean, that when he said that, I was like, the battle is real, right?
Yeah.
I mean, where they are, they could just choose something that could easily be really rough on them. So anyway, all education there in high school and above is in English. So when I spoke at the college, it was all in English. That was normal for them. And even at the high schools, when I spoke English, they were with me because I would ask questions and they would respond. And so that makes it easy. I think this is a class at the college. There's 3 classrooms that look basically like this. So these are our students, and some people in our church gave money so that I was teaching through James. They're holding a copy of a commentary on James that I was able to take to them because people in our church gave money for that.
Nice.
So that was awesome. And this is what a typical classroom looks like in a lot of places. I mean, this is sort of universal. It's pretty basic in our minds. Not a lot of technology, though some have a little bit of that available to them, but that's what it looks like.
So English, do they start
That's
teaching
my class as well.
English very young?
Yeah, they do. So, I mean, and if they're in school, a lot of the kids do learn English pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
Their native language in most of Zimbabwe is Shona,
Okay.
which I tried to learn a little bit of, but it is not easy. But many people are bilingual. So they
Okay.
speak Shona and then they speak English as well. Now, in church, I had to have a translator because not everybody knew English, but in school, pretty much everyone could understand what I was saying.
And is school just mainly for the men, or do the women get to go? Like, are they educated as well? Do they start out English at a young age?
Yeah, both. It is definitely both. And what's deceiving, I think, when I show some of the pictures is many of the girls have very short hair.
Oh,
so you might even look at a picture and it's completely mixed, guys and girls, but you think it's all guys because the hair's all really short.
Okay.
So that's very common. But yeah, guys and girls both get an education and both encouraged to, go on from that. Yes.
Okay. So the forms that they start out at, where do they, because a lot of times in third world countries, when you talk about high school, they call it university or college.
And they do over there sometimes too. Yeah.
So what would their post high school?
Well, so there's exams that they take, and they were all taking them like last week or the week before at certain grade levels. O level is Form 5, so you're talking about roughly juniors and what we would call juniors in high school.
Okay.
And you want to pass that because if you don't, then you're done.
Okay.
And then A level is like seniors, or maybe what we would call 13th grade, so Form 6 or 7, and it is required to have A level to go on to university. So again, they study for those exams. We were traveling one day on Saturday, and there were kids around in their uniforms, and I asked Sydney, like, this is Saturday, they're not going to school. He said, well, when they're getting ready for those exams, they go Saturday, they may go all summer, they do whatever it takes to pass that exam so they can keep going.
Because that is life for them.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, education is
correct.
Is important. I mean, we feel like it's important here, but not. It's not
the key to the future for them.
Yeah, survival for them.
Right.
Yeah. Let's see. Church over there.
Church is, I mean, it's for people who are Christians, and that's the majority of the population. Church is the heart of the week. And so, not everybody has a car. And if you're going to walk to church, and you might walk a little ways, and you don't really have that much, you're not hurrying home to watch the Bears, like
Right. Yeah.
there's no reason to leave quick. So church was 3 hours every Sunday. They sing a lot of songs, and it's more active than our worship service. Let me give you a little picture of that. I think we got a video.
I see all the red and white.
Yeah, exactly. So, right. I mean, let's see if I can get past that. Okay. So that's a little different than what we have, right? So the ladies were wearing red and white, and you can see some of those were young ladies, and there is a difference. The young ladies wear a short sleeve uniform, and the married women wear a long sleeve uniform.
Okay.
But there would be dancing at every worship service. So that's something that we're not exactly used to, and many of them are much louder than our worship services as well. So there's a lot of songs. I think the last Sunday's worship service was probably at least 10 prayers that they prayed during that worship service. But it was that was a beautiful experience to be with them in worship. So I loved every part of that.
To have the freedom of not worrying about the clock,
right,
and where the clock is going, and how fast, time is such a huge thing, I think, in America, that we allow time to rule our lives instead of us using our time to
we have
live
so
life.
much to do,
Yes,
and I think there's something to be learned there. Yeah.
So what was some of the differences that were most difficult for you to navigate or adjust to?
Well, I think the language is, it's just hard when you're in a culture in which,
Yeah.
I mean, some people know enough English to communicate with, but there's most of the conversation that you hear, you don't understand.
Right.
And that's frustrating to me, just because I wish I knew their language so I could have more conversation. That's just, it's uncomfortable for me to not be able to communicate as clearly as I wanted to be. The extreme poverty, hard. It's just hard to see people with very little or nothing. But that's, you could go many places in the world and see poverty like that, and it would be hard. Schedule is, we were just talking about it. It's good and it's bad, because, when you tell me we got to be somewhere at 9, so you need to be here at 8:30, and then whatever's going to happen is going to start at 9, and that is just not the way it works in Zimbabwe. So you may say we're going to leave at 2, and you don't really leave till 4 because other things come up. And in some ways that's really good, because they can see what's important and do what's important. But for an American, I think that's a challenge, because we're so scheduled. Like, if you say you're going to do it, then you're going to do it at that time. And you just have to be flexible. And I'm not always great at that. So when I'm there, though, I have a way of, sort of saying, okay, just chill and it'll be fine.
Yeah, because you allow the environment to speak to you and to guide you. And here everybody's we've got to do this at this time so we can make it to this and our next thing, instead of just being right where we are and enjoying that.
I mean, even something as little as, or as simple as, the speed at which we walk.
Yeah.
Americans, if you're in a place where people are shopping or in a downtown area, I mean, people are moving. And in Zimbabwe, you just do not walk that fast. People just don't. And so I consciously had to tell myself to just slow down a little bit, because you look like you're rushing and everybody's wondering what you're doing, when there's really no reason to walk any faster than everybody else. It's just different,
Yeah. So what was the easiest thing for you to enjoy and to not struggle with while you were
I think
over
it's things that we would have here. I mean, the simple gift of friendship. The people I was with have become friends, and though we don't see each other really often, it doesn't take long to pick up where we left off. My friend Sydney, my friend Jeffius, who is the academic dean at the college. These are guys I've known for a long time, and it's much like friendship here, right? I mean, they're family and friends we don't see for a long time, and then when we do, it's like, oh, it doesn't feel like we've been apart at all.
Right.
And so just that simple thing is a real blessing, and I'm thankful for those guys and their families, whom I know too, and that's easy to jump back into.
So community.
Yeah.
And what was I thinking another word, but I just lost it.
Yeah.
Community and just.
Well, for me, it's just friendship, I mean.
Yeah. But the body of Christ, where you can always just have like minds and
right.
things like that. But
totally agree.
So is there something over there you wish that our culture would embrace or kind of emulate or practice, something we could?
Well, and I guess we've talked some about it.
Yeah, you did, about time and rushing.
The time, just taking it a little slower. And, when you walk at a little slower pace, you just notice things that you wouldn't notice otherwise, the things that are around you, whether it's beauty or hard things as well, but you're more aware. I'm not saying we should have a 3-hour service every Sunday. It's not really that, but the idea that this time is valuable. This time is at the heart of who we are. And so to not be rushed to get to the next thing, which I'm just as guilty as anybody else. So I'm not casting stones there, but just that good idea. And another piece of that is like every morning at the college, every weekday morning, they have class from 8:15 to 10:15. And then at 10:15 is chapel. And that was always a good experience. I love the worship that's a part of that. I don't understand most of it because it's in Shona, but it's beautiful. The sermons are in English, so I did get that. And then, so that's 10:15, 10:45, and then 10:45, everybody stops for tea. Students, faculty, staff, everyone. So the students went to the dining hall for tea, and then this is the faculty gathered in the administration building. And, it's just everybody stopped and just chatted for about 20 or 30 minutes. And thankfully, they've gone to having both coffee and tea. So I'm all for that. But the idea is community again.
Yeah.
And you can see smiling and laughter there from the guys who are all teachers at college.
Yeah.
And maybe they're on their phones, but they're also talking about what's going on in the college, what's going on with family. And I think that's awesome, and then at 10:45 you go, or at 11:15, you go back to teaching till 1:15, and then lunch, and then afternoon session. So I don't know that I can ever institute that, but boy, I think it's a great idea.
Connection.
Yeah. And just a moment to relax with each other.
Well, you can always incorporate that with staff.
I know.
Like 10:30, 10:45, we're going to all go get our coffee and we're going to sit and chat for a few minutes. That would totally work.
And, it wasn't endless because there was always, classes start back at 11:15. So it's not like you can just sit around forever, but it's just that, okay, we're going to take a minute and chill. I think that's good.
Yeah. So you talked a little bit about noticing the things around you. And I do remember seeing a picture of those purple
and
flowered
I've got another
trees.
One there they are. Yeah.
So physical attributes. What was your favorite part about the land?
Well, I mean, it's both beautiful and it's hard. And I saw a lot of both. The jacaranda trees are famous there, and we were there at the wrong time of year for them before because we were there in March. So their seasons are reverse of ours, right? So it's spring there. So these are spring flowering trees, and they are everywhere, and they really are beautiful. So I was glad I got to see that in person. and then there were some, just tough things that you see with, like, this is a simple thing, but like, they don't have regular garbage pickup.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
stuff just accumulates in places. And it's unfortunate because the land could be more beautiful if that didn't happen, but it does because, well, what do you do with all your garbage? Well, you have to burn it or just try to get rid of it somewhere. Well, that's too bad, but it
Yeah.
is part of the
Yeah.
difficulty of life there.
Um, what was your worst, best, and funniest experiences about the trip?
I guess, I learned some things about myself, and maybe one of the worst was the disappointment in myself of, um, not wanting to be around the poverty, right?
Mm.
I
Mm-hmm.
mean, it's just not enjoyable. And, but I was there for 2.5 weeks, and I walk away to my nice air
Mm-hmm.
conditioned, heated
Yeah.
home and office with plumbing and everything I need. And yet there were times I just thought, I don't want to be here. And that's disappointing, you know, for it's disappointing for those feelings to be there in me because, people are suffering, and I wish I didn't have that. Like, I don't want to be a part of seeing this, but it's real. So that's hard. One of the best, a couple things there were so many really good experiences. I mean, little things like in that graduation, the graduates would come forward, they would talk about the graduate, and then people from their church or their family would come up and be with them.
Mm-hmm.
And they were so proud. And that was beautiful to me, just the celebration of that accomplishment. Um, Teaching a class in person, I've taught online before with them, but actually getting to know the students by name, by face, having the opportunity to discuss important issues, ministry was really good for me, and I hope it was good for them. My last Sunday there it was the day before I left, was really like one of the most special experiences for me. I'd been in a sort of a smaller town church the first Sunday. The second Sunday was in Harare, the capital, the biggest city. It was a big Sunday, so 6 churches had gathered together, and that was great. That was really good. This last Sunday was outside a town called Beatrice. It's the Beatrice Carey Church. It's out on a farm. The man who owns the farm, sort of wherever he's moved over the years, has started a church, and he's an elder in the church. And I mean, this is where the church met, on his farm, this small little building with the thatch roof, and it was unlike any experience that I've ever had. And being with them, I mean, in such a simple environment, I mean, there's chickens and turkeys and goats just everywhere walking around. So you hear them all during the worship service. And yet, seeing the joy that they had, uh, and I don't think I'll forget this. This is when we had communion together. And I mean, that's their communion table, is 2 plastic chairs pushed together, but it's still the body and blood of Christ that we share with every other church around the globe, whether it's in a huge cathedral with a stone communion table that's, ornate and beautiful, or whether it's 2 plastic chairs pushed together because that's what's available.
Mm-hmm.
It's still the body and blood of Christ. And it was moving to share that with them. It was powerful to me to have that experience. And after church, so, like, I walked out with a couple people who helped lead the worship, and we started this line. So we're right beside the door, and everybody who comes out shakes our hand and adds to that line until it forms a circle. So everybody who walked out shook hands with everybody else until you have this big circle. And you can see that in the picture of people coming through that. And That was beautiful to me too. So there was some real beauty in that day. And
Oh, yeah.
then Jamie Sims taught me how to make a dog out of
Mm-hmm.
balloons, and the kids
Love
loved
it.
it. You know, it
Yeah.
was, I was a little resistant to that, if I'm honest, but she said, you need to have fun. And so she was right. So
Was it?
it was a
Was it?
lot of fun, and
Yeah.
they loved
Good.
it. And it was a great experience. So
Good.
just sharing with them may have been the best. As far as funniest, had a couple of sort of between Shona and English, or between their English and my English, we had some problems. One Sunday, the first Sunday, I was talking about how we struggled in the United States with COVID, and, are we going to social distance? Do we wear a mask? Do we get the vaccine? And then, we had, all these struggles that we had. But the guy who was translating for me did not understand that I was talking about COVID. And apparently he told everyone that I was talking about Calvin, like John Calvin. So the whole congregation was a little confused about what John Calvin had to do with masks and social distancing. So that was a little bit funny. But then another one was when I was teaching my class, which again is in English. But I had a lot of discussion, asked a lot of questions. And I asked a question, and the response was that it had to do with Pawa. And I was like, I don't know what Pawa is. And they could tell I didn't know. Somebody else repeated it. And I was still like, I'm not sure what you guys are talking about. And finally, somebody said, power. And I said, oh, okay. Now I get it.
Yeah.
I just needed a translation into my American English. So anyway, some of those were just, trying to communicate. It's
Yeah.
hard to do.
Yeah. Well, it's hard to communicate with people who speak perfect English,
Right.
let alone, yeah.
Right.
So what did you learn about their culture, about God, about yourself?
So many people are on edge, like I said, like on the edge of either success or extreme poverty, and that fight for that, and the way educators fight for their students and want to bring them along. I learned a lot there. I learned that God can use us in ways that we don't expect. I mean, when I first got there, remember it's 11 years since I've been there, so it was a little bit like sort of re-entry into that culture and getting comfortable. And I got there on a Friday. I was, there's jet lag, there's all that going on, and I was tired, and I knew I was going to preach that Sunday, and I kept saying, what do I have to say to these people? And I don't want to come in and be like this American who has all the answers because he's an American,
Right.
And do I have anything? Do I have anything important to say at all? And then I remembered, when Sydney came over and spoke at our church, he was coming in cross-culturally, coming in, speaking in a very different environment, and just how powerful his message was. And I thought, okay, God can use me, even if I don't know how he's going to do that. God can still use me to do something. And then, I am one, and I think people know this. I like to be, when I speak, I want to be prepared. And I'm going to spend a lot of time doing that. And the last Sunday at that country church, I was not comfortable with what I had to preach. It was a message I'd used on the trip before that was a good, fine message. But I just kept thinking this doesn't fit. And their pastor, even though she was speaking in Shona, I could tell she was going to read 1 John 1:9, which talks about if we confess our sins, God's faithful to forgive those sins. And I thought, okay, that's what I'm going to talk about. And so in the middle of that worship service, I sketched out a few notes and thought of a couple stories. And that is not the way God normally works in my life, but that was the way God worked in my life that day. And, the guys talked to me afterwards about how powerful it was and how the people, and I'm not, that sounds like, whoa, powerful preacher, James. I don't mean that, but just because really I felt empty about what I had to say, and God gave me a word to say. That's my point. Not my ability, but that one of those few times where I felt like God gave me the word that was supposed to be said that day, not because I had investigated it, studied it, researched it, but just because God was at work. And I was really thankful for that, because I don't think what I had prepared to say was really going to be that meaningful. So sometimes God uses us in ways we don't expect.
I like that. Being being humble enough to be willing to let God lead.
Yeah, and I
and
struggle
not
with that at
stick to what
times.
you know. Yeah.
Right.
So, but good for you. Good for you. So, um, I was gonna ask. Something just came up in my head. What was the biggest change between your visits in their culture that you noticed?
A couple things. One, in Harare, the capital city,
Mm-hmm.
a tremendous number of cars. There were
Mm,
cars there before. Okay, so that's
yeah.
not like they didn't have cars, but it was at an entirely different level. I mean, the
Okay.
number of cars, the traffic is unbelievable. Totally different from what we had before. There was one stretch of road that I remember. We went down this road our first day there last time. We were on the way to a grocery store, and the foot traffic was, I mean, it was just people walking everywhere. And this trip on that same stretch of road, there was almost nobody walking. It was all
Oh,
cars. Now,
everybody was
in the
driving.
smaller towns, there was still a lot of foot traffic. But in that
Mm-hmm.
place where I remembered so much foot traffic, there was almost none. So
Huh.
they bring in a lot of cars from Asia that are used and then sell them in Africa and lots of different places. So they're not
Okay.
brand new cars by any means. And they're all either small cars or they are trucks with four-wheel drive, so they can get out to, the
Right.
places around the country. Roads are terrible in most places. Um, so that was a big difference. Solar power and those solar water heaters are new. That was not there anywhere that I saw last time. And the big water tanks. So there's some people have that in their yards and things, so they
Mm-hmm.
have water. I mean, that's a big change, because
It is.
the
Yeah.
utilities are notoriously unreliable and unpredictable. So in the few times where I was dependent on like public utilities for electricity, you might get it at 9:30 or 10 at night for
Hmm.
2 or 3 hours, and
Oh,
that's all the power you get. So if you can possibly afford solar, it's a big improvement. So
yeah.
that's something totally different,
Good.
which is good.
All right. So, what about the trip was most impactful for you?
Um, that headmaster Edson, who was so clear on wanting to bring kids along, his passion for that. I mean, like, he is completely dedicated to that, was powerful to me. This
Yeah.
elder at the country church, his name is Ephraim. Um, him starting churches wherever he goes, and this is out in the middle of nowhere, and yet people are drawn to that church. The excitement of the students that I had to learn and prepare for ministry was impactful to me. So all those good things about,
Yeah.
the character of people and their excitement for learning and doing new things, that was great. It was great to
Yeah.
see.
So I love missions trips
Right,
myself. Been to India, just got back from Guatemala.
right.
But I know they're not for everyone. But what would you recommend for someone uh, who wants to go or is thinking about going? What would you say to them?
Right. I'd say, first of all, pray about it, right? Because
Yeah,
that's the
of
first step.
course. Yeah.
Second, do some research. So find out what's there. Certainly, you could talk to people on our missions team who have been to places. Like, we have a group in Austria now. Well, a trip to
Mm-hmm.
Austria is entirely different from a trip to Zimbabwe. Not that one's easy and one's hard. It's just that they require different things of
Right.
people. So look inside and see what you're passionate about, and maybe what mission fits that passion, and how flexible can you be? What can you do without? Those are all questions that need to be answered before you were to take on a mission trip. I really have a passion so it backs up to, I know how much my education meant for me in preparing for ministry.
Mm-hmm.
So that leads me to a passion for training ministers in a way that is accessible to them. So wouldn't it be great if we could bring all these Zimbabwean students to the United States, to some of our really good colleges, and train them? Well, yeah, that'd be awesome. But that costs a tremendous amount of money. But having a college in Zimbabwe where they can go, a bus ride, or, if someone has a car to get them to the college, and then their needs are provided for a tiny fraction of
Yeah.
what it would take to come to the United States to train. Our missions dollars are multiplied dramatically with that model. So I have a passion for that. And for me, the college in Zimbabwe fits that really, really well. And for me to be able to be involved with it. And, my thing as far as teaching there has always been, I've told these guys that lead the college, if I can help, I want to help. But if you don't need me, or if there's other ways that you can do this that are better, please let me know. Don't be afraid to say, James, right now, we just don't need you to do that. And that would be okay. But however I can help them, I want to try to help, because helping those students get ministry training just only improves the life of the church. So for me, that's a really big deal, but that's not a big deal for everybody else. Maybe for other people, it's working with kids, or, putting on a VBS, or some people just really love going somewhere and working on the facilities for a church or a children's home or a college or something like that. That's what they want to do. Well, there's plenty of opportunities out there. So research really is important in preparing for something like this.
Yeah. So if someone had a desire to go on a short-term missions trip, what would their first step be here at TCC?
I would be glad to talk to him. I
Mm-hmm.
think anybody on our missions team would be glad to talk to him. Gene Heberling's the chairman of that team. And there's some help available. We don't just fund everybody's trip, but there are some help for transportation that's available. So finding out even what missions our church supports, and you might be able to look at that list and say, oh, well, that looks pretty interesting to me. We do take this trip to Austria every couple years. That's a good place to start. Not quite as demanding, maybe, as some places would be. So I think just exploration, talking to the people on that team. One thing you got to do,
Mm-hmm.
at least for most of these trips, is you got to have a passport.
Yes.
So one of the first steps is, you don't even know where you're going, you still got to have a passport. So get your passport, because it takes a while to get a passport.
Yeah.
And that's step number one. So that's where I would start.
Yeah. So how would you like to see missions at TCC expand or grow? What would you like to see happen?
Well, I'm blessed to be part of the missions team. So I meet with that team, and these are people in our church who are really dedicated to seeing the message of Jesus shared, whether it's cross-culturally, or, some of these missions are right in our back door. In fact, some of them are in our side door, because Vision Way is actually our biggest mission. So we have a wide array of missions opportunities. So I'm thankful for where we are, but certainly I'd love to see us grow that passion for sharing the message of Jesus, both right here in our community, whether it's Vision Way, or whether it's Loving Arms, or whether it's in Springfield with Inner City Mission, things that are close by, but also places that we're sharing the message of Jesus with people that we might never meet, so just a deeper passion, more excited about that.
So I think one of the things I've learned from the way you've talked or shared about your trip is that missions is about community, communication, connection, and celebrating what's going on in the area.
You alliterated that so well, Monica. Those all start
Well,
with a C.
I
So
know.
you got a sermon ready to go.
Yeah, well, we're not going to go that far. So, I have one other question. It's kind
Yeah.
of a fun one. Did you see any wild animals?
Now, when we were there before, we went to Victoria Falls, and on the way back, we went to the Hwange National Park, which is
Hmm.
like a place you would go on safari. We were
Hmm.
just driving through, so we saw elephants and water buffalo and zebras and
Wow.
giraffes and all that. This time, we weren't in that area. The only thing I
Okay.
saw were some monkeys and baboons. So
Okay.
I did see that and a
Yeah.
few of those, but mostly what I saw were cattle, goats, and donkeys on the side of the highways where they just roam
Yeah.
freely.
Yeah. Because there's no fences,
That's
right?
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, this has been a fun one for me. And nerve-wracking too, because it was our first video one, but
Yeah,
I
right.
think it went pretty good.
Yeah.
But Sunday Unpacked, we're going to get back to it next week.
Yes.
And we're going to do 2 sermons in 1 week.
Right. And we're just talking about politics, so it's easy, right?
Oh, yeah. Right. Everybody's favorite subject.
Right.
All right. So send us those questions. Text them to 217-712-6621 or email your questions to questions@taylorvillechristian.com. And for James and I, we want to say thanks for watching and listening, and we will talk to you next week.
Bye.
Bye.